The text came 72 hours before the ceremony. "We won't be there. Your sister needs us." I typed, "Understood," then booked an extra seat front row for a stranger the whole town would recognize. They thought not showing up would make me small. Instead, it just made my aisle longer. "My name is Stella Watson." The text message arrived exactly 72 hours before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. I was standing in the kitchen, wiping drywall dust off my phone, the smell of primer and new wood still on my hands. The screen lit up with my mother's name. "We won't be there. Your sister needs us." Just that. 11 words. No apology. No explanation beyond the one that explained everything. Your sister needs us. The implication hanging in the sterile blue light of the screen was the same one that had hung over every dinner, every holiday, every minor achievement of my 29 years. And you don't. You are the strong one. You are the one who understands. You are the one who can be set aside. My fiancé, Miles Garner, walked in, pulling off his scrubs. He's an ER nurse, and he carries the scent of antiseptic soap and the bone-deep calm of a man who has seen the absolute worst and still knows how to suture a wound. He saw the phone in my hand, saw the way my shoulders had locked. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just read the screen over my shoulder. His hand, broad and warm, covered mine. He waited a beat. "We're still getting married, right?" he asked. His voice was even. It wasn't a question of permission. It was a statement of fact, a confirmation of our shared coordinates. This event, this betrayal, was just weather. We were the structure. "Yes," I said. My own voice sounded distant. "We are—" My thumb moved with an old, practiced precision. Screenshot. Open folder. The folder was on my encrypted drive, the one I used for client contracts and structural load calculations. This folder was different. It was labeled, simply, Proof of Pattern. I dragged the new image into the collection. It settled neatly beside the others. There was the email from my father, explaining that my college fund had been reallocated to pay for Tessa's equestrian camp finals. There was the scanned birthday card for my 16th birthday, the one signed, "Love Mom, Dad, and Tessa," with a $10 bill tucked inside. When Tessa had received a pearl necklace for turning 14 2 months earlier, there was the screenshot of my mother's text from my graduation at UMass, the one that said, "Flight canceled, weather so proud." When the skies over Boston had been clear and blue, it was a meticulous archive of my own dismissal, an architect's ledger of emotional neglect. Each entry was a small, sharp paper cut. I had been collecting them for a decade, not out of malice, but out of a need for validation, to prove to myself that the foundation was, in fact, flawed, that I wasn't crazy. My phone buzzed again before I could even close the laptop. This time, it was the family group chat, the one I usually kept muted. My Aunt Clara. "Stella, honey, just heard the most wonderful news about Tessa's engagement party. That banker's son, so handsome. We are all just thrilled. Someone mentioned your little wedding was the same weekend. We're all assuming you'll move it, so we can all be there for Tessa's big night. It would be such a shame to make everyone choose," I read the words, "your little wedding, Tessa's big night," the casual, unthinking cruelty of it, the assumption that my life was the flexible variable, the one that must bend to accommodate the fixed, shining point of my sister. I typed, "Understood," to my mother, then I muted the group chat. I picked up the phone and made my first call. The Harbor Light Chapel, the quaint white-steepled church in my hometown where I had, foolishly, wanted to get married. A place that smelled of old wood, lemon oil, and a faint hint of coastal mildew. The parish secretary, Mrs. Gable, picked up. "Harbor Light, this is Denise." "Denise, hi, it's Stella Watson. I'm just calling to confirm the floral delivery time for Saturday." There was a sudden, sharp intake of breath on the other end. Oh, Stella, dear, I am so dreadfully sorry. There has been a most unfortunate scheduling conflict. A priority parish event has just been booked. We We won't be able to host you. My blood did not run cold. It turned to steel. I was an architect. I dealt in facts, in timelines, in structural integrity. A priority event. Denise, I said, my voice perfectly level. One that was booked in the last hour right after my mother, Elizabeth Watson, called you. The silence that followed was heavy and complete. I could hear the hum of an old fluorescent light ballast over the line. I heard her swallow. I am not at liberty to discuss other parishioners' schedules, she whispered. You just did, I said, and hung up. The next domino fell 3 minutes later. My wedding planner, a competent woman named Janine, who I had hired specifically because she was all business. Her voice was tight with professional fury. Stella, they got to the caterer. Dubois. Chef Dubois. He's pulling out. He just called me. Wouldn't even talk to me directly. Had his assistant do it. Said he's facing overwhelming community pressure. His words, apparently, the family of Tessa's new fiancé chairs the Rockport Winter Gala, and Dubois was told in no uncertain terms that if he catered your wedding, he could forget about that booking. It's half his yearly revenue. I see, I said. The walls were closing in. This wasn't just my family. This was a coordinated effort. They were pulling the scaffolding down around me. Stella, we can find someone else, Janine said, her voice frantic. There are other chefs. We can get a food truck. We can… Janine, I interrupted, my voice calm. It was the voice I used on a chaotic build site when a supplier sent the wrong grade of steel. It's fine. Cancel the package. All of it. But the deposits, you'll lose thousands. Cancel it. Send me the final invoice for your time. You've been excellent. I hung up before she could protest. I looked at Miles. He was already on his laptop, checking his shift schedule, his face a mask of quiet anger. They're trying to starve us out, he said. They are, I agreed. They think a wedding is a party. They think it's about the flowers and the food and the white church. I opened my contacts and dialed a number I knew by heart. Harbor Table Community Kitchen. This is Maria. Maria, I said, and for the first time all morning, a real smile touched my lips. It's Stella Watson. Stella, how are my new convection ovens? They are a dream. Mija, a dream. I'm glad. Maria. Listen, I have a strange question. Are you busy this Saturday evening? For you? Never. What's up? Another fundraiser. Sort of. I'm getting married, and I have a significant amount of food being delivered to you in about 2 hours. Prime rib, salmon, cases of heirloom vegetables. My original caterer had a change of heart. I want you to use it for the community dinner. All of it. Stella, that's too much. We can't. You can. But I have a condition. Anything. That you and your entire team cater my wedding on Saturday night. With that food, I'm moving the reception to the North Star building, the main hall. Can you do it? There was a rich, bubbling laugh on the other end. Mija, for you. We'd cater a wedding in a hurricane. We will be there, and we will bring the best goddamn chowder this town has ever tasted. It's a deal, I said, feeling the first crack of light. I was moving the wedding to the community center I had rebuilt from a derelict warehouse, the place where I had served meals, taught workshops, and built shelves with the forgotten people of this town. My people. I was finishing the email blast to my actual guests, the ones who knew me, not my family when my personal phone rang, not the business line, a private, encrypted number. The caller ID simply said, AL. I picked it up. This is Stella. Ms. Watson, Avery Lang. The voice was like gravel rolling in a dry riverbed. Avery Lang, the self-made billionaire who ran half the shipping and logistics on the East Coast. I had been the lead architect on her company's new sustainable port terminal, a brutal, 2-year project that had earned me her respect because I was the only contractor who never, ever lied to her. Avery, I said, surprised. A pleasure. What can I do for you? Cut the pleasantries. Watson, she barked. though not unkindly. I keep my ear to the ground in my port towns. I hear you're running into some local turbulence, a small-town blockade. Am I correct? Your intelligence is, as always, impeccable. Good. I'm in Boston overnighting at the new terminal. I was planning on flying out tomorrow. Do you need a presence? Do you need me to make a few calls? Shatter some catering careers? I laughed. A real, sharp laugh. I looked at the new, blank invitation template on my screen. Thank you, Avery. But no, the battle is already lost. So I'm changing the battlefield. I don't need you to fix this. A beat. I need something else. I need an escort. Silence. I need someone to walk me down the aisle. I said it before I even knew I was going to. The words hung in the air. Avery, I don't need the press. I don't need the money. I need a message. My father isn't coming. They chose my sister's engagement party over my wedding. The fools, she said. It was a simple statement of fact. I need to walk down that aisle, not with someone who is replacing my father, but with someone who represents what I'm building. Family isn't just blood. It's structure. It's who holds you up when the ground gives way. It's who shows up. The line was quiet for a long time. I heard her inhale, the sound of a very expensive, very small cigarillo being lit. I walked alone at my own wedding. Kid, she finally said, her voice softer. It was 1978, a courthouse hallway. My own mother wouldn't come because I was marrying a longshoreman instead of a banker. I signed the certificate on a filing cabinet. She took a drag. Nobody should have to walk alone when they've earned the right to be celebrated. She exhaled. I'll be there. What time? 6 o'clock, Saturday. The North Star Habitat Center. Good. Wear comfortable shoes. I hate heels. The line clicked dead. I looked at Miles. He was smiling, a slow, proud smile. Well, he said. That's one way to fill a front row seat. I turned back to my laptop. I finished the new invitation. The location was set. The caterer was confirmed. The guest list was culled to the bone. To the people who mattered. The ones who had shown up long before any wedding was planned. I added one last line to the bottom of the card, in small, precise, load-bearing serif font. Guests of honor. Those who showed up when no one did. I hit print. Rockport. Maine was a town built from granite and silence. The winters were not just long. They were an occupation. They seeped through the window seals, settled into the floorboards, and lived in the marrow of your bones. Our house, a handsome colonial that was featured on the town's historical walk, was always cold. Or perhaps it was just the kitchen. The kitchen was my mother's command center. It was painted a sterile, glossy white, and the air always smelled faintly of lemon polish and something simmering with resentment. Dinner was at 6 o'clock, sharp, and the conversation, without fail, orbited one person, Tessa. Tessa was my younger sister. She was, by all accounts, the cover girl daughter. She had the kind of effortless, sun-kissed beauty that calendars are made of, blonde hair that fell in perfect waves, a laugh that sounded like wind chimes, and an innate understanding that her primary function in life was to be delightful. I, on the other hand, was not delightful. I was practical. I had my father's hands broad, capable, and usually smudged with graphite or grease. My hair was a non-committal brown that I kept tied back with a leather strap. Where Tessa glided, I strode. Tessa, darling, tell us about the rally. My mother would coo, passing the green beans, which were always slightly overcooked, just how Tessa liked them. Oh, it was amazing, Tessa would sigh, her fork hovering. Becky dropped her baton, but I caught it on the second bounce, and everyone in the bleachers just screamed. Coach said it saved the whole routine. That's my girl, my father would murmur, his eyes shining. That's my little spotlight. I would be sitting there, having just finished calculating the sheer stress on a new joint I'd designed for a bookshelf, and I'd say, I finished the CAD model for the library fundraiser shelving. My father would sigh, not a mean sigh, a tired sigh. the sigh of a man who owned a hardware store but wished he'd owned a trophy shop. "That's great. Stella, just try to keep the sawdust out of the main house. Your mother's allergies." The disparity was never more apparent than on birthdays. For Tessa's 16th, our grandmother's pearl necklace was brought out of its velvet box. My mother clasped it around Tessa's throat, and they both wept a little at the beauty of it. For my 18th, 3 weeks before I left for college, my gift was an envelope. Inside, I found a gift certificate for a new set of calipers and a book of discount coupons for the local lumber yard. "We figured you'd want something you can use," my father said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Practical, right?" "Right," I said, folding the paper. "Practical." Tessa, wearing her pearls, looked at me with genuine, baffled pity. She didn't understand. To her, this was normal. This was the order of things. She was the one to be adorned. I was the one to be equipped. It was my father who said the words that became the load-bearing beam of my isolation. I was 14. I was welding a frame for a go-kart in the garage, a project I'd saved for a year to buy the parts for. He came in, his face tight with annoyance at the smell of ozone and hot metal. "Your mother's worried about you," he said, not looking at the chassis, which I was immensely proud of. "Why I'm wearing the safety goggles. It's not normal. Stella, look at you. You're covered in soot. Tessa's at cheer practice, learning to be part of a team. Why can't you be more like your sister?" "Because I don't want to be," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. He sighed again. That sigh. It was the sound of a dream deflating. "Look, I know we focus a lot on Tessa, but she's fragile. She needs the support. You're strong. You're the strong one. You can handle yourself. You're strong, so you can handle it yourself." It wasn't a compliment. It was a release, a justification for their neglect. It was the carpenter walking away from the scaffolding, satisfied that it would stand on its own, never minding that the scaffolding was lonely, that it was cold, that it longed to be part of the house. In my junior year of high school, I won the district science fair. My project was a system of modular, interlocking shelves made from reclaimed lumber and salvaged steel, designed for high-density, low-cost community housing. It could bear 400 pounds per square foot. I had built a 20-foot section of it in the school gym. They gave me a blue ribbon and a $200 check. The local paper took a picture of me, standing proudly on my own shelf, face smudged, grinning. My parents did not attend the ceremony. Tessa had a dance recital dress rehearsal. When I brought the photo home, my mother smiled. "Oh, how industrial. Dear, lovely." She slipped it into a frame. A week later, I found it. The frame was still on the mantel, but my photo was gone. Tucked behind it, facing the wall, was my picture. Facing out was a new 5x7 of Tessa in her recital costume. "Dancing is so important, Stella," my mother told me when I asked. "It teaches you social grace, how to be in the world. All this focus on load-bearing and flexural moments, it's not teaching you how to connect with people." She was wrong. It was teaching me exactly that. It was teaching me that connections needed to be built, not just felt, that they needed to be designed with integrity, that they had to be strong enough to hold the weight placed on them. Their connections were ornamental. Mine were structural. So I retreated to the one place where the structure was sound, the garage. Late at night, long after the house was quiet. That was my church. The only light was a single, 100-watt tungsten bulb hanging from a cord, casting hard, honest shadows. The air was a sacrament of pine shavings, epoxy resin, and the sharp, clean smell of new steel. Here, I didn't need to be social. I didn't need to be delightful. I just needed to be precise. I learned to read the language of materials. Wood told you the truth about its grain. Steel never lied about its tensile strength. Concrete was honest about its curing time. They didn't care if I was pretty. They didn't care if I was charming. They only cared if my calculations were correct. In the garage, I was seen. I was seen by myself. It was there I started the folder. Not the digital one, not yet. The first one was physical, a simple, manila file folder. I found it in my father's office, the kind he used for invoices. I took a black marker and wrote on the tab, in my precise, architectural lettering, next time, inside. I placed the lumberyard coupons. I placed the newspaper clipping of my science fair win, the one I'd fished out from behind Tessa's photo. I added the program from my 8th grade graduation, where my name was called for the physics prize, and the only applause came from the principal. It wasn't a scrapbook of mementos, it was a file of evidence, a ledger of the small, the consistent ways I was told I did not matter. The folder grew thicker with the years. I never blamed Tessa, not really. Tessa wasn't cruel, she was just the spotlight. She was the one the stagehands, our parents, had decided to illuminate. It wasn't her fault that the light was so bright it cast everyone else into shadow. She was just playing the part she'd been assigned. She was the star. I was the stage crew. And I learned something in the shadows. You learn to see in the dark. You learn to appreciate the things that work when no one is looking. You learn that the real strength isn't in the facade. It's in the unseen beams, the trusses, the foundation. I learned to make the structure stand, and I made a vow, a quiet promise, whispered to the cold, resin-scented air of the garage, the file folder heavy in my lap. Someday, I will build a place where no one is pushed to the edge, a place where there are no shadows, a place where everyone has a seat at the table. A table I will build with my own 2 hands, and it will be long enough for everyone, and no one will ever be left standing outside. I will build a place where no one is forgotten. The scholarship to UMass Amherst wasn't a ticket, it was a tool. It was for structural engineering and architecture, a double major that most advisors called insane. I called it necessary. Engineering was the how, architecture was the why. I needed to know both. I needed to ensure that what I built would not only stand, but would also be worth standing in. My family didn't contribute $1. The scholarship covered tuition, but books, materials, and the right to exist cost money. So I worked. I didn't work 1 job. I worked 3. My days were a rotation of scents and textures. From 5 a.m. until my first class, I was the student manager at the campus woodshop. I was back in my element. The smell of sawdust and stain a familiar comfort. I taught nervous freshmen how to use a table saw without losing a finger, and in exchange, I had access to all the scrap wood I could carry. Between classes, I worked the circulation desk at the Fine Arts Library. It was a tomb of silent, dust-moted light. I filed slides of Greek pediments and Roman aqueducts, my fingers tracing the lines of structures that had endured for millennia. I absorbed their principles, compression, tension, and the elegant distribution of load. My nights, from 7 until midnight, were spent at the Amherst Community Kitchen. It was a different kind of structure, one made of people. I washed dishes. I chopped carrots by the 50-pound sack, and I learned how to stretch a food budget to feed 100 people on $90. It was here I learned that community was not a concept. It was an action. It was a hot meal served without judgment. I lived on lukewarm coffee, stale bread from the kitchen, and the sheer, unadulterated spite of defying my father's expectations. I was not the strong one who could handle it. I was just the one who had not been given a choice. The day I graduated, summa cum laude, I stood on the grassy common outside the stadium. The air was thick with humidity and the sound of air horns. Families were everywhere, fathers lifting graduates onto their shoulders, mothers weeping into bouquets of flowers. My phone was silent. I had sent the invitation. I had emailed the time. I had received a text from my mother 2 days prior. Tessa has her regional dance qualifiers that weekend. We're all hands on deck. Honey, so proud of you. Send pictures. So I did. I had saved for 6 months to buy a decent tripod. I set it up on the grass, just outside the main thoroughfare. I angled my camera. I put my cap on, adjusted my honor stole, and set the self-timer for 10 seconds. I ran into the frame. I stood alone, holding my diploma like a shield. The camera clicked. I checked the small screen. My smile was brittle, but it was mine. My eyes were clear. I was the only person in the shot. It was, I thought, the most accurate photograph of my college career. I forwarded the picture to my parents with no text. My father replied with a single thumbs-up emoji. I sold my textbooks, packed my tools into my beat-up truck, and drove to Boston. I did not go to work for a large, sterile firm in the Seaport District, designing glass boxes for bankers. Instead, I cashed in the bonds my godmother, not a blood relative, had left me, and I opened North Star Habitat. My studio was in a rented corner of a drafty warehouse in Dorchester. My first business cards were printed at a copy shop. My mission, however, was as solid as a granite foundation. I wouldn't just build, I would restore. I would take the forgotten, derelict spaces, the old warehouses, the abandoned libraries, the shuttered community centers, and I would breathe structural integrity back into them. My first contract was for a small neighborhood library, funded by a patchwork of grants. The community board was nervous about my age, my lack of a large firm behind me. Our main concern, the board president said, is the community room. We have so many different groups, the seniors, the after-school kids, the ESL classes. We keep having to set up and break down those awful folding tables. It feels temporary. It feels, I said, like there's a kids' table and no one wants to sit at the kids' table. He blinked. Exactly. It was there my business philosophy was truly born. No one sits at the kids' table. In every project I designed from that day forward, I made the community table the focal point. Not a table, the table. I designed it myself, often built it with my own team. It was always made from a single slab of wood, or seamlessly joined timber, or polished, reclaimed steel. It was long, it was wide, it was permanent. It was a declaration that everyone who sat at it was equal. There were no edges, no hierarchies, just a shared surface. The library was a success. The table became a local legend, and it led, 2 years later, to Mariner Capital. Mariner was not a community board. It was the logistics and shipping giant run by Avery Lang. They wanted to renovate a massive, crumbling pier on the Boston waterfront, not for condos, for their workers, a new union hall, a community center, a dispatch hub, and a subsidized daycare. It was a contract that should have gone to one of the big 3 construction firms in the city. I was the wildcard bid. I got the meeting. When they asked me why my budget allocated so much for a central gathering hall, I didn't give them a speech. I showed them a calculation. You're not building a hall, I told the board. Avery Lang, watching me with unblinking, shark-like intensity. You're building a load-bearing social structure. The cost per square foot of this central table, I said, pointing to my rendering, will be returned in worker retention and reduced arbitration costs within 3 years. You're building loyalty. That's an asset. I got the contract, and then the war began. The larger, established contractors, who were now my subcontractors, thought they could walk all over me. They saw a woman under 30 in a hard hat and assumed I was the client's decorator. We'll have to substitute the I-beams. Ms. Watson, a foreman, a man twice my age, told me at our first site meeting. Suppliers backed up. We'll use a laminated C-channel. It'll be fine. It will not be fine, I said, unrolling my own blueprints onto the hood of his truck. The C-channel doesn't have the same lateral torsional buckling resistance. You'll use the W-flange I-beams specified, or you'll be in breach of contract, and your supplier isn't backed up. I called them this morning. You just get a better margin on the C-channel. The man's face went from pink to purple. They tried it all. They tried to bury me in change orders. They tried to pad their invoices. They tried to claim site conditions they couldn't have foreseen. They did not know that my contracts were as meticulously constructed as my buildings. I had written the vendor agreements myself. I had included a clause that I called radical transparency and vendor equity. It mandated open books on all material costs and a non-negotiable pay scale equity between my employees and theirs. When the head of the concrete firm tried to lowball me, I simply pointed to Article 4, Section 2. He backed down. I held my ground, and the ground I held was made of legally binding ink. My studio, North Star Habitat, wasn't just me. I hired based on skill and heart, not resume. My team was a collection of the overlooked. My lead stone carver was a man named Sal, a widower in his 60s whose hands were gnarled with arthritis, but who could make granite look like silk. My best mechanic and welder was a 22-year-old woman fresh out of trade school, who the unions had laughed at. And my part-time operations manager, Maria, the chef from the Amherst Soup Kitchen, who had moved to Boston and ran my books with the same iron-fisted efficiency she ran a pantry. We built the Mariner Capitol Pier. It was brutal. It was beautiful. We finished on time and 2% under budget. Someone on the media team made a time-lapse video of the main hall's construction. It showed the rusted-out shell of the old pier transforming. It showed the massive, single-slab oak table, 80 feet long, being lowered into place by a crane. It showed the long, open aisles, designed for accessibility and flow. They set it to some soaring, inspirational music. They called the video Aisles for Everyone. It went viral. 3 million views in a week. It was on all the design blogs, the labor union sites, the local news. It was the project that put me on the map, and my name was nowhere on it. The video was credited to Mariner Capital's Corporate Responsibility Initiative. I wasn't angry. It was the old, familiar ache. The structure was celebrated, but the architect was invisible. But someone saw. A week later, I got an email from the city of Boston, the mayor's office. They had tracked down the lead architect on the Aisles for Everyone project. They wanted to know if I would be the keynote speaker at the city's annual design symposium. The theme, they told me, was Belonging by Design. I was drafting my speech, surrounded by textbooks on urban planning. When the hurricane hit, it skirted Boston but slammed the South Shore. The call went out for volunteers. Miles was already there. He was an ER nurse at Mass General, but his real passion was disaster relief. He was a FEMA-certified volunteer, and he went where the storm went. I wasn't certified, but I could build. I loaded my truck with generators, plywood, and all the battery-operated saws I owned, and I drove south. I found him at a field hospital set up in a flooded high school gymnasium. He was triage tagging patients by flashlight. I was outside, in the rain, bracing a collapsing section of the portico. He came out during a lull, soaked to the bone, his face a mask of exhaustion. He looked at the brace I'd built. It was a cantilevered truss, ugly as sin, but it was holding. "That's a good angle," he said, his voice rough. "You an engineer, architect," I said, hammering a final wedge into place. "You a doctor." "Nurse," he said. "ER, you got any coffee in that truck?" "I have a thermos of lukewarm sludge." "Perfect." He sat on my tailgate, drinking sludge, and we watched the storm rage. He didn't ask me about my feelings. I didn't ask him what he'd seen. We just talked about the brace, about the load paths, about how the school had been built in a floodplain. Our relationship wasn't a spark. It was a weld. It was two pieces of load-bearing steel being fused into something stronger than the sum of its parts. Love, for me, didn't feel like a romantic comedy. It felt like a perfectly executed shift assignment. It was reliable. It was essential. It showed up. I never told my family about any of it. Not about North Star. Not about the Mariner contract. Not about the viral video. When the city symposium speech was written up in the Globe, I bought a copy, but I never sent it home. I knew, with the certainty of a structural calculation, exactly what would happen. My mother would say, "Oh, how lovely, dear. You know, Tessa's new boyfriend's father is in construction. Maybe you could get some tips from him." Or my father would say, "Well, don't get a big head, Stella. It's just a speech." Or worst of all, Tessa would post about it. "So proud of my big sister. She's building something I never understood it, but she's so smart, girl boss." They would take it. They would take this thing I had built with my own hands, with my own sweat, in the dark, and they would hang it in their house, and then they would put Tessa's picture in front of it. So I kept it. I filed it away, in my head, in my heart, and in the digital folder that was growing, year after year, heavier and heavier. Avery Lang did not schedule visits. She materialized. She arrived at the Mariner Capitol Pier on a Tuesday, in the middle of a torrential March downpour. I was in the gut of the main building, encased in rain gear, arguing with the electrical foreman about the conduit placement. The project was at its brutal peak. The subcontractors were still testing me. The big firms were still trying to bury me in paperwork, and the wind off the Atlantic was cold enough to cut glass. A black sedan, an older, heavy Mercedes that prioritized armor plating over style, rolled onto the gravel edge of the site. My site manager, Sal, moved to stop it. A man in a dark suit got out, opened an umbrella, and then opened the rear door. Avery Lang emerged. She was not what the magazines portrayed. The press photos always tried to glamorize her, to make her look like a female CEO. They failed. Avery was a force of nature. She was in her late 60s, with a shock of short, silver-white hair cut practically, like a soldier's. She wore a severe charcoal gray pantsuit that I recognized as bespoke, but the cuffs were splattered with mud. She had on a pair of black, rubber-soled loafers that were already caked in the grime of the construction site. A gaggle of her corporate executives, who had clearly been following her from another site, scrambled out of a car behind her, flapping uselessly in the rain. "Ms. Lang," one of them shouted, a vice president of operations I'd had several arguments with. "The operations trailer is this way. We have the full digital walkthrough. The progress metrics are all." Avery cut him off with a single, raised hand. She didn't even look at him. Her voice, when it came, was exactly as I remembered it from our contract negotiations, a low, gravelly rasp, built from decades of giving orders over the sound of diesel engines and shipping cranes. "I don't do digital walkthroughs, Robert," she barked. "If I want to see metrics, I'll read a spreadsheet. I'm here to see the steel. I want to smell the weld." She ignored the pristine, plywood-covered VIP path the VP was pointing to. Instead, she strode directly toward the active cement mixers, pulling on a pair of worn leather gloves that she'd produced from her pocket. She walked over the rebar-laden mud, her expensive shoes sinking deep, not caring in the slightest. She moved with an absolute, unshakable authority. I wiped the rain from my face, my hard hat dripping, and walked over to meet her. My blueprints were tucked under my arm, damp at the edges. She stopped 2 feet from me. She was shorter than I was, but seemed to take up more space. Her eyes were a pale, piercing blue, and they scanned me from my steel-toed boots to the fatigue under my eyes. "Watson," she said. It was a statement, not a greeting. "Ms. Lang, you look like hell," she said, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Good. That means you're not letting the bastards steal from me." "They're trying," I said. "Let them—" Her smile faded. "You're the architect. You're the one who signs the checks. Don't you ever forget it." She looked past me, at the massive skeleton of the main hall rising against the gray sky. "Show me the table." We didn't go to the trailer. She wanted to stand in the space itself. We stood in the center of the vast, open-air hall, the rain hammering down on the temporary tarps above us. The foundation for the great table was there, a long, reinforced concrete plinth, 80 feet long. The table itself, a single slab of reclaimed white oak, was being finished in my Dorchester workshop. She had the blueprints in her gloved hands, the rain beating on the paper. She stared at the drawing for the main hall. Her finger, blunt and powerful, tapped the rendering of the table. "This," she said, "the obsession. I read your file. The community library in Dorchester, the youth center in Roxbury. Every time. You fight the board. You fight the budget. You fight the very laws of physics to install one of these." She turned to face me, the wind whipping her silver hair. "It's an inefficient use of modular space. It complicates traffic flow for catering. It's a logistical nightmare to source, build, and install. You fought my operations team for 6 solid weeks on this. You threatened to walk. Her pale eyes locked on mine. Why the fixation on this one? Single table. The question was not an accusation. It was a deposition. She was demanding the core data. I looked at the concrete plinth, a long, empty line in the middle of the cavernous room. I thought of the kitchen in Rockport, the dinner conversations orbiting Tessa, the hard, isolating surface of my desk in the garage. Because I was never given a seat at the one that mattered, I said. The words were quiet, but the wind didn't take them. They landed between us, heavy and solid as the foundation at our feet. The entire site seemed to go silent. The hammering stopped. The rain itself seemed to hush. Avery Lang stared at me. Her face was granite, unmoving. She had expected an architectural answer, something about community flow or aesthetic theory. I had given her the truth. She held my gaze for what felt like a full minute. I did not look away. I had spent my entire life looking away, making myself small, accepting the logic of the kids' table. I was done. Finally, she gave a single, sharp nod. Ah, she said. The sound was one of recognition, not of pity. She turned and looked out at the gray, churning harbor. I had a wedding once, she said, her voice dropping lower. 1978. I was marrying a longshoreman, a good man, smartest man I ever knew, but his name was Italian and he had grease under his fingernails. She looked down at her own leather gloves. My family, they're proper Boston. They did not approve. My mother told me that if I insisted on that display, I would be doing it without them. They scheduled their annual sailing charity brunch for the same day. To make the point clear, the rain dripped from the brim of her non-existent hat. So I did, she said, her voice flat. I married him. We went to City Hall. His family was there. Mine was not a single one. After the ceremony, the clerk was busy. We signed the marriage certificate in the hallway, on top of a beige, metal filing cabinet. That was my wedding reception. Watson, a filing cabinet in a drafty hallway. She turned back to me, her eyes like chips of ice. You're building the table you were denied. I built an empire so I could buy the building that held the filing cabinet and tear it down. She slapped the blueprint back against my chest. Build your table, she commanded. You make it 100 feet long if you want to. You send the invoice for the single slab installation directly to my personal office. Robert in operations is to have no part of it. Understood. Understood, I said. The Mariner project was a brutal, qualified success. The Aisles for Everyone video went viral, and my name was neatly edited out. But Avery knew. 6 months after the pier opened, she summoned me to her real office, the glass and steel fortress overlooking the harbor. She didn't waste time. She pushed a set of new plans across her desk. The desk itself was a massive, scarred piece of reclaimed timber that looked like it had been salvaged from one of her first ships. The old Gorton's cannery, she said. It's been derelict for a decade. I'm acquiring it. I'm funding a full restoration. It's going to be a new city community center, library, daycare, and a full-service trade school. North Star Habitat is the lead architect and general contractor. The budget is enclosed. It is not negotiable. I opened the folder. My hands were shaking. This was it, the dream, the project I had sketched in the margins of my notebooks for years. Avery, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, she grunted. Read the addendum. Page 5. I flipped to the back. Addendum 5A. Funding for the trade school component is contingent on the creation and execution of a dedicated carpentry, welding, and structural engineering program. This program will be targeted specifically toward young women from the city's underserved neighborhoods. Minimum enrollment, 20. I looked up. She was watching me, a rare, thin smile on her lips. I'm not just giving you a building, Watson. I'm giving you a factory. You're not just building a school. You're building your replacements. You're building an army. I'm an architect. Avery, I said, my voice thick. I'm not a teacher. Bullshit, she snapped. You're a builder. You taught yourself in a cold garage because no one else would. Now you're going to teach 20 other girls how to do it. Only this time, they get a heated workshop and a proper salary. My name goes on the building, but your program goes inside it. We called it She Builds. The announcement went out. We didn't recruit from colleges. We recruited from housing projects, from high school shop classes, from women's shelters. The sound of that first day. It was the sound of my own past being rebuilt. 20 young women, all in new steel-toed boots, holding hammers, scared and fierce and ready. The sound of their saws and hammers, chan-chat, became the rhythm of my life. It was louder than any doubt. It drowned out the memory of every locked door. The local press, naturally, loved the story. The billionaire, the tough female architect, the army of Rosie the Riveters. The Boston Globe ran a human interest piece. They interviewed Avery. The reporter asked the obvious, slightly sycophantic question. Ms. Lang, you're one of the most powerful women in the world. You could have hired any of the global starchitect firms. Why put a project of this magnitude in the hands of a small, local studio like North Star? I read Avery's answer on the site. The newspaper spread open on a stack of 2x4s. Her quote was brutal and perfect. I chose her because she's the only architect I've ever met who builds people first, and then builds buildings to hold them. Her structures are sound. Her intent is sound. Everything else is just expensive decoration. Her intent is sound. I almost cried into my coffee. It was the first time in my life I felt truly, completely seen by someone who wasn't Miles. The validation was a bright, warm light, and as always, it attracted the insects. That night, my phone buzzed. A notification. Tessa had posted a new Instagram story. I clicked it. It was a video. Tessa, pouting in the front seat of her new convertible, a gift from her banker fiancé. She was wearing a filter that gave her sparkling anime eyes. Hi, she cooed to her followers. I'm just so proud of my big sister Stella. She's in the newspaper. Some people are just so lucky, I mean. It must be so easy to build all those things when a nice, super rich billionaire just gives you all that money. Wish someone would just give me a building. LOL, blessed girl boss family. The casual venom, the smiling, effortless erasure of my education, my 3 jobs, my student loans, my battles with subcontractors, my entire life's work. All of it reduced to luck, to being given things by rich people. My hand was steady. My heart was cold. I took a screenshot. I opened the proof of pattern folder. I dragged the image in. It settled beside the text message from my mother. The file was becoming a blueprint of its own. I saw Avery the next day. She walked onto the She Builds site, unannounced as usual. She must have seen the post. She saw everything. She watched me for a few minutes as I corrected a young apprentice's grip on a circular saw. You saw it, I said, not looking up. I did. I didn't answer. Good. She picked up a piece of scrap cedar, weighing it in her hand. Don't you ever, don't argue with them, Watson. Don't defend your work. It's a waste of breath, and it puts them on your level, and they are not on your level. She pointed with a piece of wood at the rising steel skeleton of the new trade school. You don't win by arguing in the comments. You win by building. You build something so big, so permanent, and so goddamn useful that they are forced to look at it every single day. You build the thing that makes them, and everyone else, have to walk through your goddamn door. She tossed the wood onto the scrap pile. Now get back to work. You're building my army. Miles proposed on a Thursday. There was no fanfare, no hidden cameras, no audience. We were in the half-finished kitchen of our small Boston apartment, the one we were renovating ourselves. I was covered in plaster dust, and he had just come off a 16-hour double shift. He didn't kneel. He just sat on a drywall bucket, his face gray with exhaustion, and held out his hand. In his palm was a ring. It was not a large, blinding diamond. It was his grandmother's, a simple, platinum band with a small, beautifully cut, old European stone. And on the shank, near the setting, there was a deep, visible scratch. "My nonna wore this for 60 years, he said, his voice rough. She was married to a man who worked with his hands. She was a baker. She never took it off. She said the scratch came from pulling her wedding ring off a rusty nail when she was helping him re-shingle the roof, the day after they were married." He looked at me, his eyes clear and honest, the way they were when he was telling me a hard truth in the ER. "It's not perfect. It's durable. It's got history. It held." I took the ring. I felt the weight of it, the cool, smooth metal, and I ran my thumb over the scratch. It was a flaw. It was a scar. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was proof of a life lived together, not just displayed. "I love the scratch," I said, my voice thick. "It's the best part." He slid it onto my finger, and it fit. We were engaged. We didn't want a Boston wedding, the thought of a $200 plate hotel ballroom, a sea of strangers from his hospital administration and my old client lists felt wrong. It felt like a performance. "I want to get married at home," I told him, as we looked at venues. "And home doesn't feel like this." Home, in my mind, was still Rockport, not my parents' house, but the town. The smell of low tide and granite, the sound of the gulls. I wanted the white, wooden steeple of the Harbor Light Chapel. It was the oldest, simplest, most honest building in town. It was a structure that had held, battered by nor'easters for 200 years, and was still standing. It was small. It was sturdy. It was ours. We booked it for October, 6 months out. And then, I did what I do. I made a binder. My wedding was a project. It had a budget, a timeline, and a structural integrity check. I downloaded every vendor contract and read them like I was reading a site survey, my red pen highlighting liability clauses, insurance requirements, and force majeure stipulations. I created spreadsheets. I insured the event. I made a specific list of vendors, the North Star list. The caterer was a young woman I'd met at the community kitchen. The musician was a classical guitarist who taught at the She Builds program. The photographer was a quiet man who did documentary work in the local shelters. My list was not based on price or prestige. It was a non-discriminatory list. My vendors were people who, like me, were often overlooked, people who showed up and did the work. The binder was 3 inches thick, tabbed, and cross-referenced. Miles called it the W-Day operational plan. I called it peace of mind. Then, 4 months before the date, the pressure began. It started, as it always did, with a phone call from my mother. "Stella, darling," that cooing, frictionless voice she used before a strategic maneuver. "I have the most wonderful news. Tessa is engaged." "I know, Mom. She posted the 20-carat equivalent ring on Instagram 2 weeks ago. I sent a gift." "Well, it's just so fast," my mother trilled, ignoring me. "Her fiancé, Charles, his family." "Well, they just do things right. They're throwing a massive engagement party for them at the club. A real celebration, not one of these little get-togethers." I waited. My red pen was hovering over a floral contract. And the only weekend the club's grand ballroom is available for the rest of the year is in October. The 15th, your weekend. The pen stopped. "Mom, my wedding is on the 15th of October." "I know that. Silly." She laughed, a sound like tiny, sharp ice cubes. "That's why I'm calling. You'll have to move it. Obviously, we can't ask Tessa to change her big night. This is a seated, 4-course dinner for 300 people. Stella, the governor might be there. You understand. Yours is just, small. It'll be easy for you to shift. You're the strong one. You can handle it." My grip on the pen tightened. "No." The silence on the line was cold. What did you say?" I said, "No. I am not moving my wedding. It's in 4 months. The contracts are signed. The deposits are paid. You and your contracts, she hissed, the velvet slipping. This is family. Stella, this is your sister. She needs this. Are you really going to be this selfish? After all Charles's family is doing for this town. I paused. What are they doing for the town? Oh, well, nothing's official, but I've heard they are very impressed with Rockport. Charles's father was talking to the mayor about endowing a new town scholarship, a permanent fund, for local kids, the Rockport Rising Scholars Fund. Isn't that wonderful? But they want to announce it at the engagement party, to show their commitment to the community. It would be a tragedy if something cast a shadow on that. The threat was there, wrapped in civic duty. It was a perfectly designed piece of emotional ordnance, a mine. If I refused, I wasn't just spiting my sister, I was stealing from the town. I was the selfish, cold architect who was denying scholarships to poor kids. I see, I said, my voice flat. I was documenting the tactics. Well, my wedding is at 6 p.m. on Saturday, October 15th, at the Harbor Light Chapel. Miles and I would love for you and Dad to be there. I went to my laptop. In fact, I'm sending you a link right now. It's a digital survey for our seating chart. I have you and Dad down for the honorary front row seats. You just have to click accept to confirm your meal choices. I was building my paper trail. I was giving them a formal, documented choice: accept or decline. My mother hung up. 3 days later, the first structural failure occurred. An email from the Harbor Light Chapel, from Denise, the parish secretary. Subject urgent. Scheduling conflict. Watson Garner wedding. Dear Stella, it is with the deepest regret that we must inform you of an unforeseen and unavoidable scheduling conflict. We have just been notified by the diocese that October 15th has been declared the feast day of St. Hubert, a day of mandatory parish-wide observance and services. We will not be able to host your wedding. We are so terribly sorry. We will, of course, refund your deposit in full. It was a good lie. It was almost believable, except I am an architect. I live in the details. I check the metadata. I looked at the email's headers, and there it was, in the CC field, hidden from my view but visible in the raw data, was a single address, EW Consulting, my mother's vanity email address for the consulting business she ran from her sunroom. She had been copied on the first draft of this letter. My mother hadn't just called. She had been consulting on the very wording of the cancellation. I closed the laptop, my blood turning to a cold, slow-moving sludge. I took a screenshot. I dragged it into the proof of pattern folder. The next call was from my florist, the young woman from the community garden. Her voice was shaking. Stella, I don't know how to tell you this. I can't get the hydrangeas. I can't get any hydrangeas. What are you talking about, Sarah? They're in season. I know. But I've called every supplier, every single one, from Boston to Portland. A private client has placed a standing, prepaid order for the entire stock of blue and white hydrangeas for that entire week. Within a 20-mile radius of Rockport, they've bought them all. Stella. The order was placed 2 days ago by an anonymous relative of the bride. As a surprise, they're holding them for Miss Tessa Watson's engagement party. It was the pettiness that took my breath away. It was one thing to sabotage the venue. That was logistics. This was personal. This was about beauty. This was my mother and Tessa knowing I loved the deep blue of the coastal hydrangeas and systematically stripping the entire seaboard of them, just because they could. That night, I told Miles. I laid out the binder, the printed email, the note about the flowers. I showed him the blueprint of the attack. He listened, his face getting tighter and tighter. He's an ER nurse. He's trained to deal with trauma, with immediate, fixable wounds, this slow systemic poison. He didn't have the tools for it. He finally stood up, raking his hands through his hair. This is insane. Stella, it's a war. I don't want to fight a war. I just want to marry you. He knelt in front of me, taking my hands. Let's go to City Hall. Tomorrow. We'll take 2 witnesses from the ER. We'll sign the paper. We'll be married. We don't need this. We don't need them. We don't need the flowers, or the church, or the chowder. I looked at his earnest, tired, loving face. He was offering me an escape, a way out of the fight, and the old 14-year-old me, the one in the cold garage, wanted to take it, the me who was strong and could handle it, but the woman I had become, the architect who had fought for every single I-beam and every single clause in her contracts, the woman who had built she-builds from the ground up, could not. I pulled my hands away, gently. No, I said. Stella, he started, frustrated. No, my voice was harder, forged in the heat of that garage. It's not just a party, Miles. It's not just a ceremony. They are trying to tell me that I don't get one, that my celebration is little and can be moved, that I am, and always will be, secondary, that I am the one who gets pushed to the kids' table. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the Boston lights. They have spent my entire life putting me at the kids' table, or telling me to wait in the garage. They have made me small so that my sister can feel big. I turned back to him, my voice as cold and clear as a steel rule. I am not moving. I am not eloping. I am not signing a piece of paper in a hallway. I am having my wedding. I am walking down an aisle. And I am sitting at the head of my own table, even if I have to build the goddamn table, and the aisle, and the building to hold it. No, more. Kids' tables. Miles stared at me for a long moment. Then, he nodded. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by the familiar, steady calm I'd fallen in love with. The ER nurse was back. Okay, he said. Okay, architect, where do we build? We didn't know that 200 miles north, in her penthouse overlooking the harbor. Avery Lang had just gotten off the phone. She had heard the same rumors I had. The rumor of the Rockport Rising Scholars Fund. The rumor of the pressure. She had her ear to the ground in all her port towns. She didn't call me. She didn't offer sympathy. She made 2 calls. The first was to her personal wealth manager. The second was to her lawyer. When she hung up, she had placed a non-refundable 3-month lease option on 2 derelict properties in Rockport. The first was the old, abandoned Algonquin Theater, a crumbling Art Deco masterpiece. The second was a small, ruined, 19th-century stone chapel on Windward Hill, a place that had been gutted by fire 30 years ago and left to the elements. She didn't know which one I would need. So, like a good logistician, she secured them both. She was building an arsenal. I, meanwhile, was redesigning my invitation. I threw out the tasteful, cream-colored cardstock with the image of the Harbor Light Chapel. I opened a new file. The new invitation was stark white, the font a clean, modern, structural-grade sans serif. It listed a date and a time, the location, for now, simply read, "To be announced," and at the bottom, I added a single line, a note to my guests. A note to Sal, and Maria, and my She Builds graduates, and the quiet photographer, and the ER nurses who had agreed to come. If you have ever been pushed from the table, this table belongs to you. The public attack began 3 days later. It wasn't a direct hit. It was a smear. It appeared on the Rockport Community Beacon, the town's most read blog, a place that specialized in civic pride and moral outrage. The headline was slick. Opportunity knocks when community design meets big money. The article was a masterpiece of implication. It painted me as a grasping, cold-hearted opportunist who had latched onto the benevolent, community-minded Avery Lang. It implied my studio, North Star Habitat, was a failing vanity project. It suggested I was using my wedding, and my family's good name, to monetize my connection to the billionaire. But the masterstroke was the photograph. It was a picture of Avery and me from the Mariner Pier opening. We were standing close, laughing at a joke one of the union welders had told. It was a good picture, but it had been cropped with vicious precision to cut out the dozen other people, the apprentices from She Builds, the union workers, The city council members who were standing with us. Cropped. It looked intimate. It looked transactional. I read the article once. My hands were perfectly steady. This was not an emotional event. It was an intelligence-gathering one. I didn't read the comments, which I knew would be a cesspool of my mother's friends expressing concern. I right-clicked the photograph. Save image as. I saved it to my desktop. I opened the file. I clicked Properties. I clicked Details. I was looking for the metadata, the EXIF data, and there it was. The photo wasn't from a phone. It was from a Sony Alpha 7R3, a professional camera, but the key was the software tag. It had been processed and cropped using Adobe Lightroom. A specific, slightly older version, a version I recognized, because my mother's personal assistant, a young woman who ran the EW Consulting social media, used that exact version. She had bragged about it at a family dinner. They hadn't even been smart enough to scrub the metadata before uploading it. It was sloppy, arrogant work. I took a screenshot of the metadata. I dragged it into the Proof of Pattern folder. It was Exhibit G. The blog post was the artillery. The infantry charge followed within the hour. My phone rang. It was Chef Dubois, the caterer I had originally booked, the one Janine had vetted. His voice was slick with a performance of professional sympathy. "Stella, my dear," he oozed. I am just beside myself. I've seen this horrible article. It's all over town. I'm afraid. Well, I'm afraid my partners and I must pull out of the event. The community pressure finally got to you." "Chef," I asked, my voice flat. "It's not pressure, Stella. It's optics." He let out a long, martyred sigh. "The Rockport Food and Wine Festival Committee, they called me this morning, just to check in. They mentioned that my community engagement was being reviewed for the headliner spot this year. They said that if I was associated with this unfortunate controversy—" "I understand," I cut him off. "They threatened to pull you from the festival. It's 30% of my yearly revenue. Stella, I have a staff I have. I'm sure you, as a businesswoman—" "I'll expect my deposit refunded in full by 5 p.m., I said, and hung up. I did not pause. I did not grieve the loss of his mediocre, overpriced scallops. I dialed Maria at the Harbor Table Community Kitchen. The line rang once. "Harbor Table, we're chopping." "Maria," I said, "it's Stella. I've got a job for you." "Mija, I saw that trash in the Beacon," she said, her voice like a hot skillet. "You tell me who wrote it. I'll go down there with a meat tenderizer." "What do you need?" "I need a caterer for Saturday. My original chef, 30% of my year Dubois, just bailed." Maria let out a rich, throaty laugh that was pure, unfiltered joy. "That overpriced gas bag. Good. It is about time. We'll do it. Of course we'll do it. It's your wedding. We'll bring the big pots. We'll make the chowder you taught us the recipe for. We'll make Sal's grandmother's bread. It won't be fancy, Stella, but it will be real. That's all I want." "Maria," I said, a small, real crack in my voice. "Real. We're in. We'll show those suits what a real community looks like. We'll be there." One problem solved. The next arrived via certified mail the following afternoon. It was an envelope from the Harbor Light Chapel. Not an email, a formal, watermarked letter. Inside was not a refund of my deposit. It was an invoice for $2,000, a catastrophic cancellation fee. They were billing me for the cancellation they had initiated. They were charging me for the Feast of St. Hubert. This was not just bureaucracy. This was a targeted attack. This was my mother. Using the church as her collection agency, I didn't get angry. I got my binder. I opened the W-Day operational plan to the Venue tab. I pulled out my copy of the contract. My red pen had been there, 9 months ago. I scanned the cancellation clause, and there it was. Clause 9B. In the event of a cancellation by the venue for reasons of parish priority or act of God, the renter is entitled to either A, full and immediate refund, or B, a transfer of all fees and rights to an equivalent, alternative venue within the Rockport Parish system. at the renter's sole discretion. I picked up the phone. Harbor Light, this is Denise. Denise, I said, my voice polite and sharp as a new saw blade. This is Stella Watson. I received your invoice for $2,000. I'm not paying it. Oh, Stella, dear, she flustered. It's parish policy. It's out of my hands. It is. Actually, it's in my hands. I'm calling to invoke Clause 9B of my signed contract. I am exercising my right, at my sole discretion, to transfer my booking, fees, and rights to an equivalent venue. I choose St. Margaret's, on the hill. That's in your parish system. Correct? It'll be a lovely substitute. The silence on the other end was a physical thing. I heard a small, squeaking sound. Denise, are you there, St. Margaret's, October 15th, 6 p.m.? Oh, goodness, she finally stammered. That's not possible. Stella, it's in the contract. Denise, an equivalent venue. St. Margaret's is equivalent, and it's not a holy day, because we both know you lied about that. No, she said, her voice rising in panic. I mean, yes, but that date, it's also booked. I let the silence sit. I let her hang on the hook she'd helped build. Booked, I said. On the mandatory feast of St. Hubert. Who could have possibly booked it? Denise. I can't. I decided to help her. Was it my mother? Denise. Did Elizabeth Watson put a deposit down on St. Margaret's, too? As a contingency. The sound on the other end was a small, strangled sob. She booked both. Stella. She booked them both. 6 weeks ago. She put deposits on both chapels for that day. She told the pastor it was contingency planning for Miss Tessa's engagement party, in case of rain at the club. Checkmate. My mother hadn't just blocked me. She had anticipated my countermove. She had boxed me in, leaving me with no church, no options, and now an invoice for the pleasure. I gently hung up the phone. Miles found me that night, sitting in the dark of our apartment, the $2,000 invoice in my hand. He didn't say a word. He just came over, took the invoice from my hand, and tore it, slowly, into 4 precise pieces. So, no church? He said. No church? I confirmed. He looked relieved. Good. I hate pews. They're bad for my back. He pulled me up from the chair. Stella, I'm an ER nurse. All I need for a clean binding procedure is a flat surface, decent light, and a witness. We can get married in the damn parking lot. He kissed my forehead, his hand on my back, steady and sure. We can get married anywhere there's light. I just want to marry you. As he said it, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a new text message from Avery Lang. It was not a message. It was a single line of text, a Google Maps coordinate, nothing else. I looked at Miles. I showed him the phone. I think I just got a new venue. The coordinates took us out of town, away from the harbor, and up into the hills, to the top of Windward Hill, a place I hadn't been since I was a kid. The access road was gravel and mud, and my truck lurched and slid, but I kept going. We crested the hill. I stopped the truck, and I stared. It was the old, ruined chapel, the 19th century stone husk that had burned down in the 1980s, a place we used to drink beer as teenagers. But it wasn't a ruin anymore. It was a construction site. The ivy had been stripped from the granite walls. The stones were clean, newly pointed. The gaping, arched windows were still open to the air, but the frames had been rebuilt from new, heavy timber, and where the roof had caved in, a magnificent soaring set of new Douglas fir trusses spanned the gap, open to the sky, lit by massive, halogen work lights. A crew was working, even in the dark. I recognized the logo on their jackets. It was the same crew from the Mariner Pier. Avery Lang was standing under the new stone archway, drinking from a thermos. She was in a suit, and her boots were caked in fresh mud. "You're late, Watson," she barked as we got out. I expected you 15 minutes ago. Time is money. I was dumbfounded. Avery? What is this? It's a building, she grunted. It's what you do. I acquired it last week. The old Algonquin theater you were looking at had a cracked foundation, a structural mess. This had good bones, solid granite. It just needed a new spine. She slapped one of the new fir beams. The crew was happy for the overtime. You're restoring it. We are, she said. But right now, it's tied up. It's in a lease. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a heavy, old-fashioned iron key, and tossed it to me. I caught it. It was cold and heavy. The lease is for 3 months, she said. It's in your name. The keys are yours. It's a raw space. But it's yours, if you want it. I looked at the stone. I looked at the new, raw, honest wood. I looked through the open arches at the lights of Rockport glittering below, and the black, endless Atlantic beyond. Who paid for this? I whispered. Avery snorted, a sound like gravel. You did. Or rather, the Mariner Pier did. That project came in 2% under budget. Remember, my board was so impressed. They issued a project manager bonus. They meant to send it to that idiot vice president of mine. I rerouted it. This is your bonus. Watson, the profits from the pier, you earned it. I closed my hand around the iron key. It was heavy. It was real. I'll take it, I said. Miles was grinning, his face lit by the work lights. Anywhere there's light, he said. I turned to Avery. It needs a sign. It's got one, she said. She pointed to a simple, routed pine plaque leaning against the stone wall. Waiting to be hung, it had 5 words on it. For those who show up. The key was heavy in my pocket. A cold, iron promise. We had less than 72 hours. The same amount of time my family had given me to absorb their rejection. I intended to use my time better. I made one call, to the SheBuilds workshop in Boston. They arrived the next morning at dawn, a convoy of 4 trucks, rattling up the gravel road to Windward Hill. 20 young women, my army, as Avery called them, they piled out, not in dresses, but in Carhartts and steel-toed boots, their tool belts already buckled. They looked at the stone ruin, then at me, and then they got to work. There was no hierarchy. There was only the plan. They moved with the swift, practiced economy of a team that had been underestimated their whole lives and had learned, as a result, to be twice as efficient. The air, which had been silent save for the cry of gulls, was suddenly filled with the song of labor, the high-pitched whine of miter saws, the percussive, rhythmic tapping of hammers, the scrape of wood being planed. This was not set dressing. This was a barn raising, a team of 4, led by my youngest welder, the one the unions had laughed at, began erecting the platform. They used raw, heavy milled pine, the same kind I'd used in the Mariner Pier. It was simple, strong, and smelled like a forest. They didn't cover it in bunting. They sanded it until the grain was as smooth as silk, letting the material itself be the decoration. Another team took on the benches. We had no pews. I would not have them. Pews were for being sorted into rows, for staring at one person's back. We built benches, long, simple, backless benches, made from the same pine, sanded by hand. They were communal. They required you to sit with a stranger, to share the same plank. The lighting team, 2 young women who had aced their electrical certification, began hanging the lights, not the delicate, whimsical fairy lights of Tessa's world. They strung heavy-duty, industrial-grade cafe lights, with warm, oversized Edison bulbs. They looped them from the new Douglas fir trusses, high above, letting them swag down in graceful, calculated curves. As the light began to fade, they switched them on. It wasn't a sprinkle. It was a deluge of soft, golden stars, a constellation we had hung ourselves, inside a chapel with no roof. While they built, Miles found a quiet corner. He wasn't a builder, not of wood. He was a mender of people, And he was mending our new family. He had a stack of small, simple frames he'd built himself from scrap oak, and beside him, a box of photographs. He was framing pictures for our guests. He had emailed everyone on our small, strange list and asked for a photo of a person they had lost. A person whose absence at their wedding would be a real, aching void. A parent gone too soon, a spouse, a best friend. We weren't just having empty chairs for my parents. We were having full chairs for the people who should have been there. We would place these small, framed photos on the seats, a quiet, profound honor roll. Miles was creating a space to honor the loved ones who couldn't come for the only valid reason because they were no longer here, not because they had chosen not to be. He was reclaiming the meaning of an empty chair. Sal, my old stonemason, arrived midday. His gnarled hands, which I knew ached in the damp air, were steady. He came with his bag of tools. He didn't speak. He just ran his hand over the threshold, the single, massive granite step that led into the chapel. He found the center line, and he began to carve. He didn't carve our initials. He didn't carve the date. He carved, in a deep, clean, modern font, 3 simple words: "Come as you are." This was our only requirement. This was the new creed of this place. By afternoon, Maria and the harbor table team arrived. Their truck was not a refrigerated, logo-wrapped catering vehicle. It was an old, dented panel van, and it smelled of yeast and wood smoke. Maria piled out, her arms full of weeds. "The hydrangeas are all gone, mija," she said, her eyes flashing with a warrior's light. "The whole coast. That bruja bought them all." "It's okay, Maria," I said. "It is better than okay," she declared. She and her team had spent the morning foraging. Not flowers. They brought armloads of wild seagrass, the kind that turned silver in the autumn light. They brought cuttings from olive trees and feathery, wild fennel. They had bouquets of rosemary and bay leaves. They began to tie them to the ends of the benches, and the air filled with a sharp, herbal, defiant scent, the scent of the actual coast. It was raw, real, and more beautiful than any cultivated, hothouse bloom. The choir arrived next. They were 6 teenagers from the community center music program I had funded. They didn't have robes. They came in jeans and flannel shirts, their old, battered instrument cases in hand. They gathered on the new platform and began to tune a cello, 2 violins, and a guitar. They started to practice. It was Hallelujah. Not the soaring, operatic solo. It was a quiet, acoustic arrangement. Their voices were not polished, but they were true. They were a harmony of the overlooked. I looked at the guest list Miles had just printed. It was a single page. Sal, the stonemason, Maria, the chef, the night watchman from the Mariner Pier, who had told me he'd never been invited to a wedding before, the head librarian from Dorchester, who was bringing her wife, my youngest welder from She Builds, who had asked if she could wear her boots. I told her I'd be offended if she didn't. This was my family, the people who were pushed to the kids' table, the ones who were told they were secondary. Tonight, they were the only ones on the list. Avery arrived at 5, not at 6, for the ceremony. At 5, during the chaos of the build, she wore a dark, impeccably tailored wool suit, but on her feet were the same mud-caked loafers. She had her leather gloves on. She surveyed the scene, the lights, the benches, the crew. Her gaze landed on me, and she gave one, sharp, approving nod. "Good work, Watson. You built a damn fine aisle." Then she saw Sal and Miles struggling with the final, heavy bench. "For God's sake, Sal," she barked. "Lift with your legs." She walked over, put her shoulder under the wood, and helped them hoist the bench into its final position. The billionaire, in her bespoke suit, helping to place the furniture. She was a builder, first and always. The buzz in my pocket felt alien, a vibration from another, lesser world. I pulled out my phone, a direct message on Instagram, from Tessa. "I don't know what kind of pathetic show you're putting on. Stella. Building a new church. Getting that rich woman to help. It's so desperate. You're just trying to get attention. The old, familiar sting. The narrative that I was invisible, and that any attempt I made to be seen was a desperate plea for the spotlight that was, by divine right, hers. My fingers were cold. I typed back one. Short sentence. I'm not trying to get attention. Tessa, I'm building a table. I put the phone away. A minute later, it buzzed again. The family group chat. My father. He had seen the Instagram post Tessa had made, complaining about my stunt. He hadn't defended me. He hadn't said a word. He had simply reacted. A single thumbs-up emoji to Tessa's post. A small, blue, digital pat on the head. A gesture of such profound, cowardly abdication that it almost made me laugh. It was the Rockport equivalent of a shrug. And finally, an email. My mother. Subject. After this, Stella. I am hearing the most disturbing, ridiculous things. When this performance of yours is over, you and I are going to sit down and have a very serious talk about the damage you are doing to this family. Not an apology, not a question, a summons, a threat. My hand was steady. Screenshot. Save as proof of pattern exhibit. Close. I turned back to the chapel. By 10 p.m., the work was done. The crews had packed up and left. The lights hummed. The chapel was silent. Waiting. Miles and I stood on the platform, alone, and then the rain began. It wasn't a drizzle. It was the sky opening up, a cold, driving, October nor'easter. Exactly the kind of storm that would have sent Tessa's club wedding into a panic. The wind howled through the open arches, and the rain fell in solid gray sheets. Miles grabbed my hand, but I didn't move. I looked up. The rain was a silver curtain outside the arches, a beautiful raging wall of water, but inside, we were dry. The floor, the benches, the platform, all dry. The new steel trusses I had designed, the ones Avery's crew had installed, were holding the line. The small, angled roof panels I had calculated to a single degree were catching the wind and water, channeling it away, creating a perfect, dry, safe harbor in the heart of the storm. I had built a place that could withstand the weather. The structure was sound. It held, I whispered to Miles, the sound of the storm roaring around us. It held, he smiled, pulling me close. Of course it did, he said, kissing my hair. You built it. The day of the wedding was clear and cold. The nor'easter had scrubbed the sky clean, leaving it a high, brilliant blue. The granite of the chapel was dark from the rain, and the new pines smelled sharp and clean in the cold air. I was in the small office I had framed out, drinking coffee from a thermos, when one of the SheBuilds apprentices knocked on the door. Stella, this was left at the gate, a guy in a male uniform, but not a USPS truck. He just handed it to me, said it was for you. She handed me a simple, white, legal-sized envelope. There was no return address. My name was typed on the front, Stella Watson. I opened it. It was not a card. It was a collection of documents. The first was a bank-scanned copy of a cashier's check. The check was for $5,000, drawn from my mother's EW Consulting business account. The payee was the Rockport Civic and Culinary Fund, the committee that ran the Food and Wine Festival. The second document was the deposit slip for that check. In the memo line, in my mother's tight, precise handwriting, was a single, devastating phrase, "Repriority exclusivity for Watson Charles event." They hadn't just pressured Chef Dubois, they had paid to have him blacklisted. This wasn't just social maneuvering, this was a financial transaction, a buyout. The paper cuts I had been collecting for years, the small, dismissive slights, had just become something else. They were no longer just paper cuts. They were receipts. They were evidence of a crime, cold and contractual, but the last page was the one that stopped my breath. It was a handwritten note. The handwriting was shaky. The loops and crosses of a woman who had been taught perfect penmanship and was now failing to execute it. I recognized it instantly. It was from Denise, the parish secretary. Stella. I was not fired. My salary was cut. My hours were reduced to 5 a week. I was told it was budgetary, but I know what it was. I was the one who processed the deposits for St. Margaret's. I was the one who was told to hold the date at Harbor Light. I was told to lie to you. I am a good Catholic. I have worked for that parish for 30 years. I refused to sign the final invoice they sent you. I told them it was a sin. They cut my hours the next day. I cannot fix what I did, but I can bear witness to the truth. I found this in the file. Mrs. Watson was very proud of her arrangement with the festival. I think she wanted the pastor to see how civic-minded she was. I hope you have a beautiful wedding. God sees the truth. Denise. I sat there, the papers in my hand. The proof of pattern folder was no longer an archive of my private pain. It was a legal case. The paper, so thin, felt heavier than a steel beam. Avery found me like that, sitting in the half-light, the documents spread on the raw plywood desk. She had arrived early, in her dark wool suit, a sprig of the wild rosemary Maria had cut pinned to her lapel. She didn't knock. She just entered, saw the papers, saw my face. "What is it?" she asked. "More incoming." I didn't speak. I just pushed the bank receipt across the desk. She read it. Her face, usually so mobile with command and impatience, went perfectly, terrifyingly still. The pale blue eyes became flat, cold, and absolute. She read the memo line. She read Denise's note. When she looked up, it was not the face of a builder. It was the face of a woman who had, on multiple occasions, destroyed men in boardrooms. "We can use this," she said. Her voice was quiet. "We can stop this wedding right now and turn it into a deposition. We can project this receipt onto that stone wall. We can hand copies to every guest. You can read Denise's letter instead of your vows. We can end them." The word hung in the air. End. And she could, with her power, with this proof. She could shatter my mother's reputation, my father's complicit silence. She could destroy the Rockport Rising Scholars Fund, expose the festival, ruin the parish. She could burn the whole town to the ground. And the part of me that was forged in that cold garage, the 14-year-old girl with soot on her face, ached to say yes. I looked at the documents, the paper cuts. I had collected them for so long. They had become part of my structure, and I realized Avery was offering to turn my swords into a bomb. I picked up the bank receipt. I felt the sharp, flimsy edge. "No," Avery's eyebrows shot up. "No, Watson, this is the kill shot." "I know," I stood up. "But I spent the last 3 days building an aisle, not a courtroom. I spent my life learning how to build, not how to destroy." I looked at her, my voice as steady as I'd ever made it. "My wedding is not an execution. It's not a trial. It's a foundation, and I will not mix their poison into my concrete." "So what do you do?" she demanded. "You let them win. You let this proof, go to waste." "It's not going to waste," I said. I folded the documents, the receipt, the note. "It's the most important part of the foundation. It's the aggregate. It's the proof that I was right." I walked over to the workbench where Maria's team had left my bouquet. It was not a cascade of hothouse flowers. It was a tight, strong, hand-tied bundle of the things they had foraged: silver seagrass, stalks of rosemary, olive branches, and the feathery, defiant heads of wild fennel. I took the folded papers, and I tucked them deep into the heart of the bouquet, wrapped tightly in the stems, hidden but present. "I'm not going to use it," I said. "I'm going to carry it. It's my something borrowed. It's the memory. It's the ledger. And I'm carrying it with me, down the aisle, and into my new life. And then I am closing the book." Avery stared at me, her mouth a tight line. Then, the granite of her expression cracked. A slow, deep, powerful smile spread across her face. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "My God, Watson," she whispered, a sound of pure, unadulterated respect. "You're a builder. All right, you're building a fortress. I'm building a table, I corrected her, gently. Miles came in then, already in his suit, his hair still damp. He was carrying two small, leather-bound books. He saw Avery, saw my face, and paused. Am I interrupting a war council? The war's over, Avery said, clapping him on the back so hard he almost stumbled. The architect just declared victory. Miles looked at me, confused, but he smiled. Good, because I finished my vows. He handed me one of the books. I opened it. His handwriting was the fast, efficient, life-saving script of a nurse. It was short, it was perfect, and the last line, I had to read it twice. I promise to be your structure and your shelter, he had written, and I promise, from this day forward, I will never, ever build a side table in this house. I laughed, a real, sudden laugh that was half a sob. I grabbed a pen, I opened my own book, I added one line to the vows I had already written. And for those who chose not to be here, I promise that we, you and I, are still, and always will be, enough. Good, I said to Miles. We're ready. Avery cleared her throat. Her face, for the first time, was not certain. It was hesitant. Stella, she said, her voice rough. I have a request. I turned. Anything. Avery, you know that. I am not a ceremonial person. I hate parties. I hate speeches. She took a deep breath, and her hand, in its worn leather glove, was not quite steady. But it would be my profound, personal privilege to be the one who walks you down that aisle. She said it, the woman who had given me a building, the woman who had torn down her own past. She was asking me. I looked at this powerful, brilliant, scarred woman, the woman who had signed her own marriage certificate on a filing cabinet in a hallway, alone. I put my hand on her gloved one. Avery, I said, my voice thick. I'm not saying yes because of the money or the chapel. I know, she whispered. I'm saying yes, I said, my eyes meeting hers, because we have matching scars. She squeezed my hand. A single, powerful grip. Then let's get you married. Watson, we've got an aisle to walk. Just then, my phone, which I had promised to turn off, buzzed from the desk. It was a frantic, typo-filled text from my Aunt Clara, the one from the group chat. Stella, honey, thank God you picked up. Your mother is beside herself. We all are. We heard about the chapel, and Avery Lang. It's all over town. Your father is. He's talking about coming, he says. He says he wants to fix this. They might just show up to save face to walk you down the aisle. Isn't that wonderful? They're going to come. I read the text, the desperation, the last-minute scramble. Not for me, but for their own reputation. They hadn't heard I was happy. They had heard I was with Avery Lang. I showed the text to Avery. She read it. She let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. She looked around the chapel, at the benches being filled by my welders, by Maria's team, by the night watchman, by Sal. She looked at the empty front row, where my parents were supposed to be. The door is always open, Avery Lang said, straightening her suit. But the table is full. The morning of my wedding was born from the storm. The sky was not just clear. It was scoured, a high, piercing, impossible blue, the granite of the chapel walls, still dark from the night's rain, shone as if it had been polished, and the new pine of the trusses and benches was a warm, blonde gold in the sharp, new light. The air was cold, but it held no malice. It smelled of the ocean, of wet stone, and of the sharp, clean, hopeful scent of freshly sawn wood. The chapel stood, waiting. The aisle I had built was ready. Everything was taut, like the moment a string is plucked, just before the note sounds. The first guest arrived at 4:30, an hour and a half early. It was him, the night watchman from the Mariner Pier. I didn't even know his last name. He was just Frankie on the shift schedule. He was a small, older man with a face like a worn leather map, and he was wearing his guard uniform, freshly pressed, with a clip-on tie. He was carrying a bundle of weeds. He held them out to me, his hand shaking. They were the tall, silver-plumed reeds from the salt marsh behind the pier. He'd cut them himself. "Miss Watson, Stella," he stammered, his eyes filling with sudden, surprising tears. I ain't never been to a wedding like this. Not as a main guest. He looked down at the reeds, his face crumpling. You gave me a seat. At the front. Me. I didn't have nothing to bring. But I saw these on my walk this morning. They ain't flowers, but I wanted to bring you the forest, or the marsh, I guess. I took the reeds from him. They were wild, and raw, and perfect. "Frankie," I said, my own voice thick. "They're the most beautiful things I've ever seen." He sobbed, a single, sharp sound, and then he pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and fled into the chapel. Taking a seat in the second row, as if he was afraid the front one was a mistake, he was the first drop. Then the quiet, steady reign of my community began. Maria and the harbor table team arrived, not through a service entrance, but through the main archway, carrying the wedding feast. They brought no silver chafing dishes. They carried in 2 massive, steaming, enameled cast-iron pots. The scent of their famous clam chowder, thick with cream and thyme and the smokiness of bacon, instantly filled the cold stone chapel, chasing away the last of the chill. It was the smell of home, the smell of safety. Behind them, a half-dozen kids, their children and grandchildren, scrambled in. They were quiet, awed by the space, and they immediately found the last bench. They didn't have iPads. One of them dumped a large plastic bag onto the pine boards, and the sound of 1,000 Lego bricks skittering on wood echoed in the high, open air. They set about, with grave, silent importance, to building a fleet of Lego boats. The choir, my 6 teenagers from the community center, gathered on the platform. They were in their best clothes, flannel shirts, clean jeans. One girl in a dark velvet dress she'd clearly found at a thrift store. They started to practice, their voices and instruments small against the granite, but gaining strength with every note. They were singing Hallelujah, as I had asked. But it was the version I had specified. No soaring, individual, look at me solos, just the harmony. 6 voices, braided together, finding their strength in the collective. Their blended notes rose up and up, into the open sky, a testament. I stood in the small office, watching this improbable, perfect family assemble. My phone, which I'd left on the plywood desk, buzzed. I looked at it, a text from my mother. Don't overdo it. Just that, 4 words, a final, pathetic attempt to shrink me, a warning not to be too happy, not to be too proud, not to build my structure too high, lest it cast a shadow on her. I did not reply. I did not screenshot it. There was no need. The proof of pattern folder was complete. I simply pressed the button on the side of the phone. The screen went black. I turned off the notifications. I turned off the line of communication. I was done. Miles found me. He was in his suit. It was a beautiful, deep charcoal blue, almost the color of the sea at dusk. It fit his broad, nurse's shoulders perfectly. He looked solid. He looked like my partner. He was fiddling with his cuff. "Damn," he muttered, smiling at me. I did a 5-minute check on all my gear, but I missed one. I'm missing a cufflink. I looked. One of his French cuffs was hanging loose, a small, human imperfection. I smiled. I reached into the pocket of my own jacket. I hadn't put on my dress yet. I was still in jeans and a flannel, my own uniform. I pulled out a small, heavy brass button. It wasn't a button. It was a small, lathed piece of metal. Something I had made in the wood shop while testing the new metal lathe for the She Builds program. It was a failed experiment, a bit of scrap, but it was solid. "Here," I said. I didn't try to pin his cuff. I just put the small, heavy piece of brass in his breast pocket, padding it. "A placeholder, something I made. It'll keep you balanced." He laughed. covering my hand with his. "Perfect," he said. "It's better than a cufflink. It's real." The sound of a heavy, precise footstep on the stone threshold made us both turn. Avery Lang stood in the archway. She was in a black, exquisitely cut suit. No, it was a tuxedo, a woman's tuxedo, tailored to her with a military precision. In her lapel, where a rose should be, she had a single sprig of the wild marsh reed Frankie had brought. She had seen him arrive. She had honored his gift. Her silver-white hair was stark against the dark wool. She was not smiling, exactly. It was the smile of a general after the final. Decisive battle has been won. It was a post-war smile, a smile that said, "The fighting is over. Now, we build the peace." She walked toward me, and she was carrying a single, crisp, manila envelope. "Avery," I said, my heart suddenly hammering. I look appropriate, Watson," she said, cutting me off, "which is more than I can say for you. Go get your dress on. But first," she handed me the envelope. I looked at her. More bad news." "The news," she said, "is never bad or good. It is simply leverage." I opened it. It was not a bank receipt. It was a single-page document from her legal firm. It was a deed option. It gave North Star Habitat, my company, the exclusive, irrevocable option to purchase the chapel and the surrounding 5 acres of Windward Hill for the sum of $1, to be executed at any time within the next 90 days. My hands were shaking. I read the lines. "This, Avery, it's a building," she said. "I bought it. I fixed the spine. But it's not my building. It's yours. It's the home of the She Builds program. If you want it, it's a place for your table. But it needs a name." I looked at the legal line. The property known as Windward Chapel, hereafter to be named, and in the blank, Avery had written, in her own strong, black ink hand, the North Star Chapel. You're giving me a church," I whispered. "I am giving you an option," she corrected, her voice firm. "I am not giving you anything. Watson, you earned this. You built this. This is your bonus, paid in granite and pine. A contract is only valid if both parties sign." I looked at the document, at the signature line waiting for me. I don't have a pen." Avery smiled. That full, rare, magnificent smile. "You don't need one." She pointed to the aisle. "You sign the contract with your footsteps. The moment you take the first step down that aisle, the deal is executed. If you agree, of course." I looked at the aisle, the long, clean pine board path, lined with my people, lined with the benches we had built, leading to the man I loved. "If I agree," I whispered, my eyes blurred. "If I agree—" "Good," she said, taking the document back and slipping it into her pocket. "Now, for God's sake, go put your dress on. It's 5 minutes to 6. I ran to the small office. I pulled on the dress. It was simple. Cream-colored wool. It had long sleeves and pockets. It was practical. It was warm. I ran a brush through my hair. I put my bouquet, the one with the hidden receipts, the one with the rosemary and seagrass, on the desk. It was 6 o'clock. The time on the invitation, the choir's harmony swelled. The guests, all 40 of them, stood up. I walked to the entrance, the great open stone archway. I stood in the doorway, my heart a hammer against my ribs. I looked. The front row was full. Sal was there. Maria was there. Frankie the watchman was there, weeping silently, and the other 2 seats, the ones I had, in a fit of old, dying hope, left for my parents, were empty. They were definitively, absolutely, finally empty. They had not come. The final act, the last-minute save my aunt had promised, the desperate scramble for their reputation, had been just talk. Faced with the choice, the real, final choice, they had chosen the other party. They had chosen Tessa. I did not feel pain. I did not feel anger. I felt a click, the sound of a final, heavy, load-bearing beam locking into place. The structure was complete. The light from the setting sun broke through the open arches, striking the floor, turning the dust motes into gold. The music rose, the pure, blended voices of the choir. Avery Lang stepped to my side. She was exactly my height. She looked at the empty seats, then at me. She held out her arm, the black wool of her tuxedo sleeve strong and steady. "Ready, architect," she said, her voice a low, perfect rumble. "Ready to build your chosen family." I looked at her, the woman with the matching scars. I looked down the aisle I had built, at the man I had chosen, at the family that had shown up. I put my hand on her arm. "Ready," I said. I placed my hand on Avery Lang's arm. The black wool of her tuxedo was solid, warm, and real. It was a structure. The moment my hand touched her sleeve, the music, which had been a soft, expectant harmony, seemed to take a breath, and then, as one, the 40 people gathered in the chapel rose to their feet. It was not a polite, rustling stand. It was a sudden, unified eruption. It was a standing ovation. But it was not for me, the bride. I knew this instantly. This was not the sound of people admiring a dress. This was the sound of recognition. Sal, the stonemason, was clapping his gnarled, powerful hands, his face split in a wide grin. Maria, the chef, was whistling, a sharp, two-fingered trill that echoed off the granite walls. Frankie, the night watchman, was weeping. But he was on his feet, his applause silent but vigorous. My welders, my carpenters from She-Builds, were stomping their boots on the new pine floorboards, a rhythmic, rumbling thunder that vibrated up through the soles of my shoes. This was the sound of the side table. This was the roar of the kids' table, the overlooked, the forgotten, the ones who were told they were secondary. And they were not clapping for me. They were clapping for us. They were on their feet because, in this place, on this day, they were finally the guests of honor. Avery's hand came up and covered mine, which was resting on her arm. A general's grip. "Walk with me, architect," she murmured, her voice for my ears only. And we took the first step. The aisle was long. I had designed it that way. It was a journey. We passed the first row of benches. These were the chairs Miles and I had designated for our ghosts, our honor roll, the ones who had a valid reason not to be here. As I passed, I saw the small, simple oak frames Miles had built. I saw the black and white photograph of Sal's wife, a smiling, dark-haired woman from 1970, her face full of life. I saw the snapshot of Maria's eldest son, his arm slung over a baseball bat, forever 17. I saw the kind, smiling face of the head librarian's mentor, the woman who had fought for her tenure. I saw a picture of Miles's grandmother, the one whose scratched ring was on my finger. Her hand, even in the faded photo, looking strong and capable. This row was not about sadness. It was about presence. It was the testament that we were a community built not just of those who were here, but of those who had made us. We were acknowledging that their love was a load-bearing part of this new structure. It was a row of honorable, earned, sacred absences, and it made the empty seats where my parents should have been, the ones they had chosen to vacate, seem so small, so petty, so profoundly insignificant. We took another step, and with this step, I felt the first of the paper cuts begin to fall away. I felt the memory of the first email, the one from the Harbor Light Chapel. "We are so terribly sorry." A scheduling conflict. The lie had felt like a stone in my stomach for months. Now, in this chapel of real stone, the one I had earned, the memory of that email was a piece of ash, and the wind from the open archway blew it away. Another step. I thought of Chef Dubois, community pressure, 30% of my revenue. I could smell the rich, thyme-scented chowder simmering in Maria's pots at the back of the chapel. I thought of the $5,000 check my mother had written to the culinary fund, the one tucked into my bouquet, a payoff for mediocrity. I was walking toward a feast made by hands that loved me. The chef's betrayal wasn't a wound. It was a favor. It dissolved. Another step. I saw her. Denise, the parish secretary. She was here. She wasn't a guest of honor. She was in the third row. Her hands clasped tightly in her lap, wearing her best Sunday coat. She looked terrified, as if she expected to be struck by lightning for her presence. Her face was pale. She had risked her 30-year career, her small salary, to send me that note, to bear witness. As I drew level with her, our eyes met. I did not smile. This was not a moment for smiling. This was a moment of profound, solemn acknowledgement. I held her gaze, and I gave her a single, slow nod. I see you. I know what you did. You are safe here. You are welcome at this table. Denise's entire body seemed to unclench. The terror on her face was replaced by a sudden, overwhelming wave of relief, and she bent her head, a silent sob shaking her shoulders. She had been absolved, not by a priest, but by the woman she had been paid to lie to. It was not revenge. It was justice. Another step. Tessa's voice. You're just trying to get attention. My father's blue thumbs-up emoji, the small, digital symbol of his utter abdication. My mother's final, sterile command, don't overdo it. These were the last, deepest cuts. They were the load-bearing beams of my old life, the one where I was the strong one, the one who could be set aside. I felt the familiar, cold weight of them. And then, the sound. It was not a sound that belonged in this sacred, handcrafted moment. It was the sound of a heavy, uninvited door, the old, original stone archway at the back of the chapel being slammed open. Bang! The sound was a gunshot. It was a violation. The choir, startled, stopped. The high, sweet harmony of Hallelujah fractured and died. The music was gone. The only sound was the sudden, cold wind whistling in through the open door, and the collective, sharp inhale of 40 guests turning to look. I did not turn. Avery did not turn. We stood, frozen, halfway down the aisle. What? What is this? A voice called out. My father's. He was out of breath. What is this? This place? We're here. My mother's voice, high and frantic. We're here. Stella. We made it. It's not too late. A ripple of confusion went through the guests. Frankie, the watchman, looked angry. Sal looked like he was about to get up and bodily remove them. I felt a tremor in Avery's arm. Not of fear, of rage. I felt her muscles bunch, her entire body coiling, ready to turn, to unleash her legendary boardroom-destroying fury. Stella, my father's voice again, taking a step inside. It's as we're here to walk you. This is not right. This is a show. We're here to fix it. They had come, not to celebrate, not to apologize. They had come to fix it, to correct my error, to reassert their narrative, to claim their rightful place at the head of a ceremony that, to them, was just a performance of family honor. They believed they could walk in, stop the music, and the entire production would simply pause, wait for them, the rightful stars, to take their places. Avery began to turn, and I squeezed her arm, hard, my hand, the one resting on her sleeve, gripped her. It was the only signal I gave. Do not stop. Avery froze. She looked at me. I was not looking back at the door. I was looking forward. I was looking at Miles, who stood on the platform, his face a mask of cold, protective fury, his eyes locked on mine. I took a breath, and I took a step. I pulled Avery with me. She understood. Instantly, she matched my step. We did not pause. We did not turn. We did not acknowledge the interruption. We did not give them the power to stop us. Our clasped hands, my grip on her arm, was the only answer. Stella, my mother shrieked, a sound of pure, baffled outrage. Stella, stop, we are here. You're making a fool of yourself. You're making a fool of us. We kept walking, step, step. The only sound in the chapel was the crunch of our heels on the pine floorboards. I heard a strangled noise from my father. I heard my mother gasp. She's not stopping. Elizabeth, she's not stopping. It was the single, most defining act of my life. To not stop, to not turn, to not engage, to keep walking toward the life I had built, away from the one that had tried to tear me down. We reached the platform. We stood in front of Miles. The chapel was dead silent. The wind from the open, violated door was the only sound. Avery, in that profound, terrible silence, performed her final act. She took my hand, the one that was gripping her arm, and she uncurled my fingers. She turned it, palm up, and she placed it, with enormous, ceremonial gravity, into Miles's outstretched hand. She leaned in, past my ear, and her lips brushed my hair. Her voice was a low, triumphant, gravelly whisper. "The contract is signed," she said. "You signed it, Watson. You signed it by not waiting." She squeezed my shoulder, and then, with a look of such magnificent, dismissive power that it could have stripped paint, she turned and walked, not to the front row, but to the side, standing at the edge of the platform, a sentry, a guard. I stood facing Miles. Our hands were locked. The officiant, a quiet woman from the city clerk's office who had agreed to come, looked terrified. She looked at me, at Miles, at the two people standing, stunned, in the doorway. I gave her the power. I gave her my voice. I turned, not to my parents, but to my community. To Sal, and Maria, and Frankie, and my She Builds army. My voice was not loud, but it was clear. It was the clearest, most structurally sound thing in the building. "Thank you all for being here," I said. "Thank you for showing up, and a special thank you to all the people and all the events that taught me the most valuable lesson of my life." I looked toward the open door, but not at them. "Thank you for teaching me to never, ever wait for an invitation." I turned back to Miles. He was smiling, a slow, proud, brilliant smile. He picked up his leather-bound book. He didn't look at the officiant. He looked at me, and he read his vow. "Stella," he said, his voice ringing in the silence, "I promise to be your structure and your shelter, and I promise, from this day forward, I will never, ever build a side table in this house." The choir, taking their cue from him, from that love, from that strength, started again, not from the beginning. They just picked up the harmony. A soft, wordless chord. The music was back. The light was back. I lifted my bouquet. I held it in both hands, and in my mind, I felt the sharp edges of the paper hidden inside, the check, the note from Denise, and tucked in with them, a faded, dog-eared photograph from my garage, the picture of the first long table I ever built, the one for the Dorchester Library, my first real table. My file was closed. I put the bouquet down on the platform. I did not need to hold it anymore. My ring, the one with the scratch, knocked against the new, raw wood of the platform. Clack. The sound was small, but it was as final as a gavel, as a seal. I choose the one who shows up. I thought. The vow was to myself. The officiant, her courage restored, finally spoke. Her voice was shaky, but she said the words, Who gives this bride?" Before I could speak, before Miles could say anything, a voice rang out from the side. "Avery Lang." "Those who came," she said. Her voice was a judgment. And then, a miracle. From the benches, Maria, her voice raw with emotion, called out, "We do," and then Sal, "We do," and then all of them, the welders, the carpenters, the librarian, the watchman, the children, all 40 of them, a rising, joyous, defiant chorus, a sound that finally finally slammed the back door shut on the wind and on my past. We do. I smiled. My face was wet, but I was not crying. It was the rain from the night before. Finally letting go, the structure had held. I turned to my husband. I squeezed his hand. The music swelled. The voices of my family, my real, chosen, standing ovation family, rising to the open sky. And as the officiant began to speak, we turned to each other, and we began to say, I do. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'm so glad I got to share it with you. Please comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from. I'd love to connect with you and hear your own thoughts. And if you love this story, please subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so more people can hear it.